Radio waves. They're everywhere around us, even though we can't see them. But what makes them tick? Well, they're a type of electromagnetic wave, just like light or X-rays, but with very different characteristics. And one of the things that makes radio waves unique is how their frequency and wavelength determine how they move through the world. Longer wavelengths, like those used for AM radio, they can kind of bend around obstacles. Trees, hills, even buildings, making them super reliable for traveling long distances. Meanwhile, shorter wavelengths, like those we use for Wi-Fi or UHF TV signals, tend to get absorbed or blocked more easily by things like walls and even leaves. I mean, think about that. A rainy day could actually mess with your TV signal just because the water in the air is interfering with the shorter wavelengths. A buddy of mine once had this old shortwave radio, and he kept losing reception because he lived in, I kid you not, the middle of this thick forested area. So what did he do? He adjusted his antenna, just slightly changed the orientation to cut down on interference from the trees, and suddenly he was picking up stations from another country. It's all about understanding how radio waves interact with their surroundings. Now, let's talk about how radio waves actually get from point A to point B. They've got a few tricks up their sleeves, depending on the situation. You've got ground wave propagation, which hugs the Earth's surface and works well at lower frequencies. Then there's line-of-sight propagation, where the signals travel directly between antennas. This is what's used for things like satellite TV or your phone's connection to a cell tower. But the most fascinating, in my opinion, is skywave propagation. Here's how it works. Imagine a radio signal going up into the atmosphere, bouncing off the ionosphere, and then coming back down hundreds or even thousands of miles away. It's what makes long-distance communication possible, especially in amateur or ham radio. There's this one famous story of an amateur radio operator. She was like part of this major ham radio contest, who connected with operators in over 20 different countries, just by using skywave propagation. How cool is that? Of course, it's not always smooth sailing for radio signals. A big challenge they face is something called fading, which is when the signal strength at the receiver fluctuates. This usually happens because of something called multipath propagation. Basically, the signal ends up taking multiple routes to the receiver, bouncing off buildings, trees, or who knows what. Sometimes these paths interfere with each other and, well, the signal strength takes a hit. And then there's polarization, which is kind of like the orientation of the wave's electric field. If your transmitting antenna is vertically polarized, the receiving antenna works best if it's, vertical too. Think of it like shaking hands. You've got to match the angle if you want a strong connection. A group of students I read about, they were part of a ham radio club. They used vertically polarized antennas to cut through interference in an urban area. Thanks to their setup, they ended up winning a school competition for the clearest signal. Smart, right? So you've got all these factors: wavelength, propagation methods, polarization, and they all work together to make radio communication this incredible, giant, invisible web that connects us. And on that note, that's all for today. It's been great talking with you about radio waves and their journeys. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.